Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Ino groaned, almost limping to the table with their tea. Her body felt stiff and tender, and it was ridiculously painful to walk. It felt like her legs were going to fall off with each slow, careful step. Naruto smirked up at her from his seat. Sore. The kunoichi sat down in the chair across from him, shooting him a playful scowl. I'm glad you find my pain amusing. More like hilarious. Since when were you so witty? When the young man grinned and shrugged, Ino rolled her eyes and changed the subject. What are your plans for today? She asked, slowly sipping at her tea. He lifted his eyebrows in mild surprise, not expecting her to care about what he was up to. I was planning to take the books back to the library, and after that I have to meet with the Hokage. I'll go with you. I checked out over half of those books, so it's only right. Oh, and we can get breakfast afterwards. There's this place down the street from the academy that I've been dying to try. Naruto shrugged his shoulders again. Sure, but will your legs be okay? This is nothing. A little exercise will do them good. She grabbed both of their cups from the table and stood to walk to the kitchen. I'll be ready in 20 minutes. Leave without me and I'll kill you. He smirked and leaned back in his seat. Wouldn't dream of it. I can carry more of the books, you know, Ino grumbled, staring at the pile of books in his arms. It was nearly quadruple the size of her own, and her own pile wasn't that small to begin with. She wondered why he didn't just make a few shadow clones to lessen the load since he could apparently make dozens without even breaking a sweat, but before she could ask, he replied. It's okay, your legs are still sore from skating. It's my fault for pushing you so hard. Ino shook her head. It was fun, and I'm glad I actually got to use my skates for once. They've been collecting dust since I got them for my birthday 2 years ago. Yeah, we should go again sometime. The young woman almost tripped. Was Naruto asking her out? Reasoning that he didn't have that kind of subtlety, she carefully nodded her head. We should. As if he'd been expecting that answer, Naruto cracked a grin. Hopefully next time you'll spend more time skating and less time falling on your butt. Asshole. Despite her best efforts, though, she couldn't keep a tiny smirk from appearing on her face at his statement. They walked the rest of the way to the library in silence, both deciding to just enjoy the quiet atmosphere of the crisp, winter morning. There were a few people milling around, but for the most part, the streets were deserted. In the winter, Konoha didn't really get started until around 8 in the morning. Naruto, surprising her a bit with his strength and chivalry, shifted his tall stack of books to one arm and opened the door to the library for her with the other. Thanks, she said, slipping inside as quickly as she could so that he wouldn't have to hold the books for long. He followed her into the building and placed his books on the desk labeled, Returns, along with Ino's, letting loose a short breath of air as he stretched his arms into the air. That was quicker than I thought it would be. You can go straight to the restaurant if you want. It won't take long for me to talk to the Hokage, he said, exiting the building. Ino shook her head. That's okay, I'll just tag along with you. He shrugged as if to say, suit yourself, and jammed his hands into his pockets, shielding them from the cool winter air. They reached the tower in a matter of minutes, and after bounding the many steps leading to the top, stood in front of the receptionist's desk. Unfortunately, the Hokage's right-hand man was manning it. Shizune lifted an eyebrow at the two of them, brown eyes calculating and suspicious. Since Sakura and Naruto had been helping the Godime with a lot of her work lately, the woman had much more free time to indulge in village gossip. Well, this is a pairing you don't see every day. Realizing that unless she did something their cover would be blown, Ino quickly stepped forward. I ran into him at the library, so we decided to get breakfast together with Sakura. Is she around? Naruto glanced over at Ino, impressed by the lie. He couldn't have come up with something that good even if he'd had an entire hour to think. Shizune slowly shook her head, still eyeing the two as if she didn't believe them. She just started her shift at the hospital, so I'm afraid she won't be able to join you. Perhaps you could wait until lunchtime. Ino held her stomach and winced for dramatic effect, hoping the action wouldn't be too much. I'm pretty hungry. I guess we'll just have to go without her, the girl said, sighing as if disappointed by the prospect of eating alone with Naruto. Yeah, I guess. I was looking forward to seeing Sakura-chan, too. He walked towards the large double doors of the Hokage's office, unable to take the medic nin's stare. I'll be done in 10 minutes, and we'll leave then, he said, glancing over his shoulder at Ino. Sure thing. Ino sat down in one of the cushy chairs outside of the office, grabbing one of the many magazines stacked on the coffee table in front of her in an effort to avoid Shizune's suspicious gaze. The woman was far from stupid. With 10 minutes and the right questions, she was certain that the medic nin could get her to crack. Just like she'd thought, Shizune immediately began shooting questions her way. So, do you often run into Naruto? She asked, eyes focused fully on the blonde. Ino shrugged her shoulders. Not really. Maybe once every couple of weeks. I see. You two looked pretty comfortable with each other. The statement caught her off guard. Did she and Naruto really look that chummy to others? Sure, they'd been living together for over 2 weeks, but she didn't treat him any different than usual and neither did he. Chalking it up to Shizune trying to get inside of her head, she put on a wry smirk and rolled her eyes. I hear so much about him from Sakura that it's kind of hard not to be. Unfortunately, the older woman refused to give up. You know, now that I think about it, Sakura mentioned that Naruto's been distracted lately. We were debating whether or not he'd found himself a girlfriend. That Naruto, not a chance. What girl would go out with him? He's loud, annoying, and immature. Sure, he can have a sweet side every now and then, but he gets extremely petty about the stupidest things. Shizune narrowed her eyes. For someone who only hears about him, you seem to know a lot. Shit. Didn't Shizune have anything better to do than cross-examine her? I'm just repeating what Sakura said. Luckily, Naruto emerged from the Hokage's office at that exact moment, a small frown stretched across his face. Ino hopped up from her seat and practically threw the magazine down onto the table. Ready to go? She asked, eager to get away from Shizune's prying. Seeing her excitement, Naruto winced. I can't go to breakfast with you. Ba-chan gave me a mission, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. What? Right now? Yeah, me and Shikamaru have to catch a Nukenin that ran off with some kind of important document. Shika. Why him? When Naruto shrugged, she sighed and did her best not to pout. She really didn't know why she was so disappointed. It was just breakfast, after all. Oh, well, that's okay, I guess. I'll just eat something at home. Sorry. Ino pasted on a smile and shook her head. You're the rumored Rokudaime of Konoha, and this is probably some sort of mission to give you more experience or something. We can catch breakfast another time. Her eyes cut to Shizune. With Sakura. Sorry, he said again, looking deeply remorseful. She almost felt like punching him on the shoulder and telling him that it was okay, but Shizune was still staring at them with a suspicious frown and she really couldn't afford to have false rumors spread about their non-existent relationship. Instead, though, she turned around to leave. Later, Naruto, Shizune-san. Watching her retreating back, Naruto moved to catch up with her. I'll walk you home. You were complaining about your legs hurting, so. I'm fine, Uzumaki. Later, she said again, hoping he would catch the hint. He'd have to go back to his house to get his equipment anyway, and it'd look much more convincing if they didn't leave together. When he didn't, she gave him a small wave and continued on down the stairs. Shizune stared at Naruto with narrowed eyes, noticing the way he looked at Ino. No matter what their words said, it was obvious that there was something going on. You seem awfully concerned about Ino. I'm not. I'm just worried because there are so many stairs and her legs are still sore from. Naruto quickly shut his mouth. He'd almost said too much. God. Shizune was good. From training. She said she did some hard training yesterday. He glanced up at the clock behind her desk and pretended to look surprised. Oh, look at the time, I'd better find Shikamaru and get ready for the mission. Bye. Shizune. Before Shizune could say another word, he jogged down the stairs after Ino. The woman frowned deeply, crossing her arms over her chest. It was only a matter of time. Dash dash dash. Naruto sped through the trees at a breakneck speed, ducking and weaving between tree branches with practiced ease. His mind occasionally wandered, but remembering the dozen or so times he'd bumped his head, chest, missed a tree branch, he forced himself to concentrate just enough to avoid hurting himself. Oi, Naruto, slow down. We have 2 days to complete this mission. Shikamaru called from somewhere behind him, exerting far more effort than he'd wanted to on such a simple mission. The Junin's breath came in short, tired puffs, and he struggled to keep the blonde in his sight. Naruto slowed down and grinned sheepishly. Sorry. Guess I got a little carried away. Shikamaru snorted. A little. I ate so much dust that I feel like a vacuum cleaner. The blonde laughed and slowed his pace a bit more. Why do you think Ba-chan keeps sending us on these missions? The Nara shrugged. I'm probably being a bit egotistical, but I get the feeling that she's trying to force us to have a good relationship with each other since I know a lot about the administrative and military functions of Konoha. Huh, why wouldn't she just teach me how to do it? Face it, you don't have the brainpower to manage this village alone. No one does. Behind every great Hokage are a few trusted advisors and assistants. While he didn't like to be underestimated, he could admit that the task of running a village was a daunting one. Beating up bad guys was easy, deciding whether or not the market district should expand wasn't. I guess, he said after a few seconds, a frown on his face. Noticing his disappointed look, Shikamaru continued. I don't mean anything bad by it. Eventually you will be able to take on more responsibility, but I get the feeling that Tsunade-sama wants to step down as soon as she can. Probably within the next 5 years or so. That soon? Naruto asked, incredulous. The old hag had at least another 10 or 15 in her. She probably wants to give you as good of a chance as possible. The position isn't promised to you, but if you were nominated, I don't think too many people would object considering recent events. The blonde smiled at his friend. Thanks, Shikamaru. For what? I'm just giving you my honest opinion as a shinobi, he said with a little smirk on his face. They traveled the rest of the way in silence, focusing more and more on the mission as they got closer to their destination. The mission was only a B rank, but as Naruto had learned during the events at the Great Naruto Bridge, even a routine escort mission had the potential to go to shit. A slight rustling of leaves instantly caught his attention, and he narrowed his eyes at a small shadow to his left. Shikamaru, Naruto whispered. Also noticing the noise, Shikamaru nodded. Yeah, they split up silently, moving to take out the 5 or 6 shinobi chasing them. The two of them made quick work of the enemy, not even having to resort to using ninja techniques to take them down. They were Chunin level at best, and judging by their forehead protectors, they were from the grass country. How does it look? Naruto asked, tying the enemy shinobi up with their own wire and stripping them of their weapons. One of them had a pretty cool looking katana, so he grabbed it to add to his collection of liberated weapons back home. Shikamaru sighed deeply, biting back the urge to say, troublesome. I found the base. It's a small concrete building about 50 feet from here. They have every entrance point heavily guarded, so sneaking in and retrieving the scroll without being noticed impossible. I can't believe I'm saying this, but brute force may actually be the only way. Naruto, unable to help himself, grinned. Really now? Don't give me that smile. We need to be in and out before their reinforcements arrive. So, what, 5 minutes? I can do that. Before the blonde was able to jump off, Shikamaru grabbed the back of Naruto's jacket. Nothing loud. Fight like a shinobi for once. Annoyed, Naruto shrugged his friend's hand off. I got it. Using an Udama Rasengan, Naruto blasted a hole into the south wall of the building. He then created a dozen or so shadow clones, using the smoke from the blast as a cover as he and Shikamaru took them down. These shinobi were much stronger than the Chunin that had been following them, and they actually managed to take out his first batch of clones. Unfortunately, since they were so busy fighting his clones, they didn't notice Shikamaru's shadow creeping towards them. With them captured, it was child's play to knock them out with short chops to the back of the neck. That wasn't so bad, Naruto breathed, tossing the unconscious bodies into a pile. A loud, slow clapping resounding from one of the dark hallways caught their attention, and they snapped their heads around to see a small shadow walking towards them. Well, this is an honor. I never thought they'd send the great Uzumaki Naruto out on such a small, frivolous mission. He's from Konoha, Shikamaru murmured, noticing the enemy shinobi's headband. Naruto reached for a kunai with a smirk. Can't have him ruining our good name after we've worked so hard to rebuild the village. You don't know who you're messing with, boy, the man sneered, hands raised towards Naruto. Shikamaru's eyes widened as he realized exactly who, or, to be more exact, what, the man was. Careful, Naruto, he's a Yamanaka. Furrowing his brows, Naruto lowered himself into a slight crouch. I know. No, you don't know. Just being out of his line of sight isn't enough. Don't even meet his eyes. The Yamanaka smirked. I see you're familiar with a lot of clans' techniques, but tell me, have you ever seen this one? The man opened his mouth wide in a silent scream, bringing only Naruto to his knees. Shit! Naruto yelled, slamming his hands over his ears. His ears rung painfully, but he was able to throw a kunai and pierce the man's leg, breaking the Yamanaka's concentration before he could fully complete the jutsu. The man let loose a grunt and jumped back. He pulled the knife out of his leg with a slight wince, pain obvious on his face. Just before Shikamaru's shadow could reach him, the man jumped out of its range, using chakra to hang onto the ceiling. He dropped the scroll to the ground with a knowing grin. Take the scroll? That wasn't the point of this whole thing anyway. What are you talking about? Naruto panted, managing to stand on wobbly legs. Whatever the Yamanaka had done left him with the sickening feeling of vertigo. You'll find out soon enough. With that, the man formed a few seals and disappeared in a swirl of leaves, further confirming the fact that he was, indeed, from Konoha. Once he was certain that the older shinobi was gone, Shikamaru grabbed the scroll and walked over to Naruto, concern evident in his eyes. Are you okay? Yeah, I stopped it in time. He took a deep breath and glanced at the sky from the hole he'd blasted in the wall before, noticing that it was around mid-afternoon. That wasn't so hard. Do you think we can make it back to Konoha before nightfall? I thought you were rushing here so that you could enjoy some time off around the town, but you want to go back. Why? Naruto shrugged his shoulders, unable to come up with a viable excuse. He couldn't say he wanted to go home because he was worried about Ino, after all. Shikamaru stared at Naruto for a few seconds before lowering his head and sighing. It was hard to deny the boy when he had those large, blue eyes trained on yours. Fine, but in return, you have to write and file the mission report. There's no way I'm going to do anything besides sleep after sprinting back to Konoha. Grinning widely, Naruto shot off towards the exit. Deal. Thanks, Shikamaru. Let's go. With a heavy sigh, Shikamaru followed, hoping that he could avoid swallowing another mouthful of dust from his overeager friend. Ino boredly flipped through a fashion magazine, eyes barely registering the images on each page. With Naruto gone and herself unwilling to leave the village until she received her test results, there really wasn't that much to do. A knock at the door snapped her out of her boredom-induced daze, and she nearly jumped to her feet to see who it was. She cautiously turned the doorknob and peeked outside. It'd be hard to explain to anyone else exactly why she was answering Naruto's door. When she caught a glimpse of orange through the crack, she nearly flung the door open in surprise. Naruto, what about your mission? The blonde grinned. Finished it. Ino raised her eyebrows. Seriously. Me and Shikamaru make a good team. He's the brains, I'm the brawn. You know, when you put it like that, I can somehow see it. They stood there for an awkward few seconds, both just staring at the other. Finally, Naruto tilted his head in curiosity. So, are you gonna let me into my own home? Depends. Did you bring me a souvenir? When he frowned, she laughed and walked back into the apartment. I'm kidding. Are you hungry? Starving. I only had a ration bar today. Ino scrunched up her nose, knowing exactly how chalky and tasteless those things could be. Ew. Go take a shower and I'll make you something edible. Thanks, Ino. Rather than answer, she shooed him with her hand and went into the kitchen. Naruto watched her retreating back with a smile. Even though Ino felt as though she was mooching off of him, he was really getting the best end of the deal. Her cooking, while never anything elaborate or complicated, was always delicious. He couldn't explain it well, but it had the same feeling as Ichiraku ramen. Whenever he ate her food, he felt happy. As if the food was made especially for him and no one else. Realizing that he'd better get cleaned up, he walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower. He let the water soak into his unruly blonde hair and sighed, feeling the fatigue from that day's mission begin to wash off. After a few minutes of just enjoying the hot water on his body, he finally began to soap up his body and hair. He took another few minutes to rinse off, and throwing on an old t-shirt and shorts, he emerged from the bathroom. He then walked into the kitchen to see what Ino was cooking. It smelled like she was frying something, but he couldn't be sure from his distance away from the stove. Being as quiet as he could, Naruto slid up behind Ino. Smells good, he said, looking over shoulder into the pan. Go away, I'm not done yet. But I'm hungry, he whined. Ino rolled her eyes. She used the pair of cooking chopsticks in her hand to pick up a cube of tofu and hold it up for him to eat. When he grabbed the piece of food with his teeth, she pushed him away with her shoulder. There. Go away. Unsatisfied, Naruto leaned forward again, resting his chin on her shoulder. Can't I have just a little? She poked him in the middle of his forehead with her pointer finger. Go. Both her tone and glare left no more room for argument, so he stuck out his lower lip and shuffled out of the room. Naruto plopped down in his chair, holding his stomach as it roared and begged for food. He could hear the sounds of her frying, and it was becoming more and more unbearable with each passing second. That little taste she'd given him had only made him hungrier. It felt as if his stomach was eating him from the inside out, threatening to break down his own bodily tissues unless it was fed. Finally, the kunoichi emerged from the kitchen with a tray of food. Setting the dishes down on the table in front of him, Ino shot him a bright smile. I know you've had a long day, so I made you tofu stir-fry and a small sesame vegetable salad. It should help you sleep better. She seated herself in the chair across from him and gestured to the food. Go ahead, itadakimasu. He wasted no time in grabbing his chopsticks, practically inhaling the food. He usually didn't like it when she made salads, but he found the fresh cucumbers and spinach she'd used to be oddly refreshing. Noticing how fast he was going through his food, Ino pushed her own across the table. Here, you can have mine. Naruto paused in his eating, looking at her with an unsure frown. What about you? There's more in the kitchen. Satisfied with her answer, he shrugged and grabbed her bowls, inhaling her food just as fast as he had his own while she stood to get more food for the both of them. By the time she'd returned with a second batch of their food, he was just finishing off the food she'd given him. She slid him another serving and watched amused as he instantly started in on his third helping. Finally, Naruto began to slow down. I thought I was going to have to cook more, Ino joked, putting a mouthful of the stir-fry into her mouth. Rather than answer, he shot her a grin and continued to eat, eyes sparkling with what appeared to be happiness. Her heart warmed at the childlike joy on his face. The more she cooked, the more she could understand why her mother took such pride in the food she made for herself and her father. There was something magical about watching others enjoy your hard work, and even if they didn't say anything, you could see the appreciation in their faces and their eyes as they ate. After a few seconds, Ino smiled and leaned forward on her hand. I'm glad you came home safely. Putting his chopsticks down for the first time since he'd begun eating, Naruto met her eyes with a wide smile. Me too. Dash dash dash. Watching as he picked over his food, Ino felt herself grow more and more frustrated. She was certain the breakfast she made tasted fine, either that, or her taste buds had died over the last 9 hours. Eat something. I can't, he mumbled, stabbing at his tamagoyaki with his chopsticks. He attempted to lift the eggs to his mouth, but shortly afterwards, he let them fall back to the plate with a light plop. What are you worried about? If you don't pass, the worst that will happen is that the Hokage will be angry with you. If I don't pass, I either have to find another place to live or go home. If anyone should be worried, it should be me. She stared down at her food and sighed, suddenly finding it to be unappetizing. Great. Now I'm not hungry anymore. She stood up from the table with her dishes and walked into the kitchen. Bring your dishes in here. I'll wrap them up so that we can eat them later. Doing as she asked, he gathered his food and followed her. As he moved to place his dishes next to hers, his hand accidentally brushed against hers, causing them both to jump back as if they'd been shocked. The two of them stared at each other for a few tense seconds, neither of them knowing what to say. Finally, Naruto backed away from the counter. I'm gonna go get dressed. Yeah, me too. Half an hour later, the two shinobi left the apartment and headed to the academy. There was already a small crowd of around 50 gathered in the small playground area as torture and interrogation hopefuls waited for the list to be posted on the wall of the building. Finally, a chunin emerged from the academy and pasted up a single, large piece of paper. He was barely able to get out of the way before the crowd of people stormed the list, all desperately trying to see if their name was there. From their position in the back of the group, Naruto could see that there were only 11 names on the paper, making him even more worried. One of the names was definitely Ino's, so that lowered his chances of being up there. It took a few minutes, but they were eventually able to get close enough to see as disappointed and excited people alike dispersed. Being the taller of the two, Naruto was able to see first, and scouring the list, he immediately saw his name towards the top. I made it. Look, I got an 82. He yelled, turning to the girl at his side. Ino grinned widely and nudged him in the shoulder. That's awesome. Do you have any idea how big of a deal that is? I know. Hey, there's an opening at the front. We can see the list a lot easier from up there. Grabbing her hand, Naruto dragged Ino to the front of the crowd, easily pushing people out of the way with his free hand. Now able to see, Ino looked over the list with a wide smile. All of their hard work had paid off. Both she and Naruto had somehow, against all of the odds, managed to pass a test that no one thought they could. However, as her eyes scanned the list, she felt her heart drop into her stomach. I'm not there. What do you mean you're not there? That's impossible. His excitement immediately forgotten, Naruto moved to get closer to the board, knocking a few people off of their feet with the strength of his shoves. He scoured the paper for Ino's name, and eyes widening, realized that she was right. He turned around to look for Ino, only to see that she wasn't behind him anymore. Ino, he called. A shock of blonde hair a few meters away caught his attention, and he pushed his way through the crowd to catch up with it. Ino, hold on. Don't talk to me right now, she said, not slowing even as he reached her. Naruto furrowed his brows, falling into step behind her. There has to be some kind of mistake. Let's go back and talk to. There's no mistake. My dad was right. I'm not cut out for torture and interrogation. No way. You're the smartest person I know next to Sakura-chan, and you're definitely 100 times smarter than me. I'm sure if we go talk to Ibiki or Ba-chan they'll fix it. If it weren't for the fact that she was on the verge of tears, Ino might have laughed. Even when he was complimenting her he was still thinking about Sakura, And worse, he was basically saying that she was inferior to the green-eyed Kunoichi. When Naruto reached out his hand to stop her, Ino roughly slapped it away. Do not talk to me right now. Okay. Naruto blinked. What the hell? Was she mad at him? Unperturbed by her tone, he quickened his pace to keep up with her. I just don't want you to give up here. I'm sure it's just a big misunderstanding. Realizing that he wasn't going to leave her alone until he was sure that she was alright, Ino turned around to face him, a small smile on her face. It was all she could manage in her current emotional state. Thanks, Naruto. You're a good friend. I just want to be alone for a while. Okay. Sensing that he would finally give her some space, she turned around and walked away, leaving a defeated Naruto in her wake. Dash 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 dash. A worried frown on his face, Naruto stood outside of Ino's door. He hadn't seen hide nor hair of the girl since they'd parted that morning, something that deeply concerned him considering it had been dark for well over an hour. Since he'd been in the apartment practically all day, that means she hadn't eaten, showered, or even used the restroom in nearly 12 hours. The young man took a deep breath and placed his hand on the doorknob, deciding that being beaten up for entering her room without permission was well worth the price of making sure that she was alright. He gave the piece of metal a little twist, and to his genuine surprise, the door was unlocked. Slowly swinging the door open, Naruto peeked into the dark room. It took him a few moments to find her since he only had the small stream of light pouring in from the living room to go off of, but he was eventually to make out Ino's small, curled up form on the floor in front of her window. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her shins, and her face was buried in the small nook between her clasped knees. I have ice cream cake, he said, standing in the doorway to her room. I remember you saying you liked ice cream and cake, so I got you both in one. Pretty smart, huh? He waited a few seconds for an answer before walking into the room and sitting down on the floor next to her. Since he'd been alone for most of his childhood, he had never quite learned how to comfort other people. His mind raced through a million possible things he could say to cheer her up, but none of them seemed right. To his relief, Ino lifted her head from her knees with a loud sniffle and began to speak. I don't know what to do, Naruto. I don't want to go home. Not like this. Not as a failure. But where else can I go? Frowning at her words, Naruto quickly interjected. But you're not a failure. Like I said, it's probably just a big misunderstanding. I'll go talk to Ba-chan tomorrow and she'll clear this whole thing up. He paused briefly to gather his thoughts before speaking again. And you can stay here. I don't care. Ino shook her head, instantly vetoing the idea. I can't do that. Our deal was that I'd only stay until I passed the application test. But you didn't pass, did you? You can stay here until the next test. The young woman shot him a deadpan glare. Naruto, that's 3 months from now. Then you have even more time to study, Naruto said, shrugging off her argument. Ino stared at him in shock. She studied his face for any sign of deceit, or hell, even uncertainty. When she didn't find any, Ino felt the corners of her lips twitch upward. Since they were already sitting close to each other, she simply leaned more heavily into him. Her head was tucked snugly under his chin, and for the first time since she'd left home, she allowed herself to fully relax in the presence of another person. He knew he shouldn't be thinking about it, but he couldn't help himself. He was hugging a pretty girl in the dark with no one else around. His heart thumped loudly in his chest, and he idly wondered if she could hear it from her position next to him. This wasn't right. Even though it was only a friendly hug, he still shouldn't be doing this, and especially not with Sakura's best friend. Quickly but gently moving away from her, he opened the cake box and grabbed the knife. Now that you're feeling better, how about some cake? It's from that bakery you said you liked, he said, eyes focused solely on the treat in front of them. He didn't quite trust himself to look at her yet. Once again surprised by her roommate, Ino's eyebrows arched high up on her forehead. You went all the way to the shopping district just to get me a cake. Naruto shrugged. It's not like I walked. We're ninjas, remember? It only takes 5 or 10 minutes to get there by rooftop. You didn't have to do that. Hey, you've been helping me since you got here. Cooking for me, helping me deal with Sakura, helping me study. That's just what friends do, Naruto. And so is getting an ice cream cake to make you feel better. Ino frowned at him for a few seconds, but it eventually turned into a small smile. He knew just what to say to make her feel better. She grabbed her fork and dug into the cake, deciding to drown her sorrows in the sweet embrace of cake and ice cream. Standing in the Hokage's office, Naruto found himself on the receiving end of a rare, proud smile from the Godime. Tsunade's brown eyes shone with so much respect that the Junin couldn't help but look away in embarrassment. He was idly wondering if this was what it was like to have a mother until the woman finally spoke. I have to say, Naruto, I'm really pleased with you. Not only did you meet my expectations, but you exceeded them. You legitimately passed this test even though I only gave you a week to prepare for it. Why aren't you more excited? Raising his eyes to meet hers, Naruto sighed. Well, Ino took this test too, and she didn't pass. I just can't believe it. The Godime raised her eyebrows. Yamanaka Ino. That is strange. She's a bright girl. She opened her desk and shuffled around a bit before producing a large manila envelope. After looking over a few of the papers inside, she stared at Naruto with a small frown. Naruto, Ino passed the test. She got a 93, the highest out of all the examinees, and her father specifically requested to train Ino himself. Not sure if he was hearing her correctly, Naruto stared dumbly at the older blonde. So, Ino passed. She got into the program? He asked, trying not to look too hopeful. When the Hokage nodded, however, he couldn't stop a wide grin from stretching across his face. He knew it. After witnessing firsthand how hard Ino had slaved over the piles of books they'd checked out from the library, he just couldn't believe that she would actually fail. His eyes sparkled as he imagined the reaction he would get from his roommate after he told her the news. Noticing this, Tsunade furrowed her brows. For Naruto to be this happy for a girl that he wasn't especially close to was more than a little strange. Is there something I should know about? Quickly wiping the grin from his face, Naruto averted his gaze. Nope. Nothing at all. I'm just happy that I passed. He said, backing towards the door. Later Ba-chan. With that, he quickly turned around and rushed out of the office before the woman could utter another word. Left alone in the office, Tsunade narrowed her eyes. Shizune. She shouted, leaning back in her chair. After a few seconds the young woman rushed into the room, cheeks red and flushed from running. Although she'd been an entire floor below, she had still somehow managed to hear her master's call. Hi, Tsunade-sama, what do you know about Naruto and Ino? Naruto bounded up the steps to his apartment, excited about telling her the good news. His mind ran through the dozens of different ways he could tell her. He could go for the old fake-out method, pretending to be depressed before surprising her with what he'd learned. Alternatively, he could also make her guess until she got it. Either method sounded fun, even though they would probably earn him a beating afterwards. With these plans in mind, he opened the door to see the girl devouring the cake he'd bought her last night, furkful after furkful of ice cream disappearing down her throat. Frosting and crumbs clung to her cheeks, and judging by the slightly musky scent coming from her body, she hadn't had a shower since the night before they'd received their exam results. It was a pathetic sight. Putting his pity aside for the moment, Naruto grinned and walked up to her, deciding that she didn't deserve to be led on any more than she had been already. Ino, great news. Shooting him a bored glance, Ino mumbled through a mouthful of sugar. You brought me another cake. The blonde shook his head, mile-wide grin still on his face. Sensing that he had something legitimately important to tell her, Ino perked up a bit, swallowing the large amount of food left in her mouth. What? I just talked to the Hokage. She looked over the test results, and it turns out you passed with a 93. A small silence followed his declaration, and slowly putting her fork down on the table, Ino leveled him with a glare. Naruto, if you're ing with me, I swear. I'm serious. You passed. Before he knew what was happening, Ino was hugging him tightly, pressing her sticky cheek against his. She was practically vibrating with excitement, and he had to grab onto her waist to keep them both from toppling over. She screamed and shouted at the top of her lungs, eyes bright and happy for the first time in 24 hours. When she suddenly burst into tears, however, Naruto quickly began to panic. What? Why are you crying now? He exclaimed, alarm evident on his face. Idiot, it's because I'm happy. I can't help it, okay. Realizing that he still had his arms around her waist, he quickly let her go and cleared his throat, averting his eyes as he did so. That's great, but I didn't tell you the other news. Ino shot him a puzzled look, not so subtly urging him to continue. Well, since you got the highest score and all, your dad wants to train you himself. At least that's what Ba-chan said. My dad wants to, what? But why? After a couple of seconds, her face fell into realization. He's trying to protect me. He's going to give me stupid, mindless tasks instead of actually teaching me anything. Naruto nodded his head, all excitement gone from his face. That's what I thought, too. That asshole. I don't believe this. After all that asshole. Naruto frowned at the crestfallen expression on her face, feeling a small amount of anger begin to creep into his heart. Then just turn the offer down. The girl shook her head and sat back down on the chair, placing her head in her hands. You don't understand. He won. My dad is second in command of the torture and interrogation department. It'd be seen as disrespectful to turn his offer, especially since he's my father. Unwilling to give up, Naruto crossed his arms. I'm sure we could bullshit Ba-chan with a story about how you want to start at the bottom or something. You know, work your way up and earn the right to be an official member of the department without any favoritism from daddy. There's no way she wouldn't respect that. Do you really think that would work? When he nodded, she smiled nervously and looked up at him. Hey, Naruto. About me being allowed to stay here for another few months. I don't think it's good for me to go home right now, and. The young man grinned. Sure. When Ino beamed and jumped up to hug him again, Naruto felt his face grow hot. The first time he had been too caught off guard to really think much about it, but this time, he was well aware of the feelings that were coursing through him. It wasn't like he'd never been hugged before. Tsunade hugged him every so often. Shizune seemed to view him as her own personal hug machine, and during his training trip with Jiraiya, he'd been hugged and generally dry humped by dozens of older women who thought he was cute, much to the chagrin of Jiraiya. This was completely different, though. He was actually reacting to it. His mind flashed to the numbers he'd read in Ino's bra. 34C. Size 34C, apparently uncontained by a bra, were pushing against his chest. Thank you. I owe you so much. Seriously. What do you want? Name it. I'll do anything for you. Naruto backed away, struggling to keep his mind from wandering to places that it didn't belong. If this was one of Ero Sennin's books. He roughly shook his head to squash that train of thought and grinned. Then, make me some ramen. Ino stared up at him, a disbelieving frown on her face. That's it. He shrugged his shoulders. I like the ramen you make. Really? When he shrugged and nodded again, she smiled uncertainly and turned to fulfill his request. Then, hold on. I think I have enough flour to make 2 or 3 bowls. Naruto watched her bounce off to the kitchen, confused. Even with a sticky face, unwashed hair, sweatpants, and a baggy sweatshirt, she still managed to look more attractive than over 90% of the women in Konoha. Dash dash. Ino blew into the room, stomping purposefully towards Naruto. She slammed a piece of paper and a marker down on the coffee table in front of him before seating herself directly next to him. I thought about it, and I decided that ramen isn't nearly enough to pay you back. Surprised, Naruto scooted away a bit and waved his hands in front of his face. It's fine, Ino. You're making me dinner every night and even breakfast sometimes. That's part of our deal, though. I'm supposed to do that. I mean, I want to do something more. Something that will actually help you like you're helping me. That's why I've decided to help you get over Sakura. What? He yelped, eyes widening. Ignoring his reaction, Ino continued. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to break Sakura down into pros and cons. To illustrate her point, she wrote Sakura's name at the top of the paper in huge, dark letters. Under it, she wrote the words, good, and bad, separated by a long, vertical line. Now, name one good thing about Sakura. It took him all of 2 milliseconds to think of something. She's beautiful. Ino scrunched up her face. Well, that's really subjective, but okay. She's cute, she said, writing down the word. I said she's beauty. Name something bad about her, she said, cutting him off before he could finish. She hits me sometimes. Hard. Okay. She's a violent brute. What else? As if he'd been thinking of these things for years, Naruto immediately began to rattle off Sakura's better qualities. She's smart, and nice, and ambitious, and fun to be around. And, what about bad stuff? Ino asked, stopping him for the second time. Naruto placed his chin on his hand, obviously lost in thought. After a few seconds, he slowly began to speak. Well, she can be selfish. And hypocritical. I guess she also treats me like a kid sometimes. And sometimes she's a real know-it-all. She also has really bad taste in guys, and can act like she's better than other people. Whoa, slow down. My hand can only write so fast. Despite saying that, she was secretly pleased that he was able to objectively name all of Sakura's bad points. Anything else? The young man paused for a second before shaking his head, eliciting a small frown from Ino. It was obvious he had more to add, but since he'd already named a substantial amount of bad things, she decided to let him off. Now look over this list. Weigh the good and the bad against each other and see how you feel. Doing as she asked, Naruto grabbed the piece of paper from the coffee table and leaned back on couch, studying the list carefully. He'd never really noticed before, but Sakura had a lot of flaws. While he wasn't overly fond of the way Ino had worded some of the things he'd said, she'd scribbled down, selfish bitch, rather than selfish. He had to admit that for the first time, he was starting to have doubts about his feelings for Sakura. From her position at his side, Ino watched his face for any hints as to what was running through his mind. Annoyingly, Naruto's face was completely devoid of emotion as he concentrated on reading over the list. Fed up with waiting, she leaned forward. So, did it help? Are you over her? As if he'd just noticed she was there, he stared blankly at her before shaking his head. Not really. I feel the same way about her, he lied. Well, can't say I didn't try, Ino sighed, standing and stretching her arms. Since I'm going to be staying here for a couple more months, I was thinking I should get myself a futon. It's getting uncomfortable sleeping in just a sleeping bag. Sure. Go ahead. Pouting at how easily he'd brushed off her invitation, she decided to be bold and ask him straight out. Will you come with me? Feeling a little embarrassed when he turned his curious blue eyes on hers, she awkwardly shrugged her shoulders. Shopping alone is boring. Surprised that she'd actually want to be seen with him in public, he slowly nodded his head. Okay. Yeah, just let me throw on some pants and we'll go. Immediately, Ino's eyes dropped to see that he was, indeed, wearing only a pair of boxers. Her face heating up slightly, she turned towards the door. Why you do that? I'll just wait here, she mumbled, a little upset with herself for both not noticing his state of undress and for being affected by it. He was in boxers, for Cammy's sake. It wasn't like he was wearing a banana hammock. Her face turning another shade of red at the thought, the young woman leaned her forehead against the door. She definitely needed some air. Dash dash. The teens chatted animatedly as they walked through the market district, gaining more than a few stares from some of the patrons. Since the Yamanaka flower shop was only a block away, everyone in the immediate area had heard about Ino's disappearance. She knew it was risky to be in the area, and even worse, walking with Naruto, but she was tired of hiding from the entire village. Staying inside all day was starting to get to her. Noticing her destination up ahead, she grabbed Naruto's arm and dragged him into the store. As soon as the owner of the shop greeted them, she noticed Naruto freeze in her grip. "What's up?" she asked, raising an eyebrow in his direction. Nothing. Ino furrowed her brows but shrugged, chalking it up to his normal weirdness. "Well, then, come on. I want to be back before 5 so that I can start dinner. I'm trying a new recipe, so I'll need all the time I can get. Plus, there's going to be a surprise for dessert." Rather than bounce around and bug her about what she was making like usual, Naruto simply grunted and shoved his hands in his pockets, confusing his roommate even more. "Okay. Now you're acting like Sasuke," she said, knowing how much he hated being compared to his long-deceased teammate. Unfortunately, her words barely registered with the taller blonde. "Let's just grab a futon and go." Ino blinked. Now she knew something was up. Still, if he wasn't going to tell her, there wasn't much she could do about it short of hopping into his mind, something she wasn't too keen on doing given that he still had the 9 tails sealed into his belly. Instead, she led him down the aisles to where the bedding was located. She looked over the prices, and after a few minutes, she managed to find 2 ridiculously cheap ones shoved in the back. They were a little dusty, but other than that, they were in perfect shape. She turned and held the futons up to Naruto with a smile. "Which one do you like?" Without even looking at them, Naruto answered. "Does it matter?" Instantly, Ino's face dropped into a frown. "What the hell is your problem?" "Nothing. Just pick one and let's go." She studied his face for a few seconds before slowly nodding her head and throwing one of them back onto the shelf. The one she'd picked looked soft, fluffy, and most importantly, was the cheapest. She led him up the counter and smiled at the older man working the register. "Just this, please," she said, reaching for her wallet. "Uzumaki Naruto, out buying bedding with your girlfriend?" The man teased, leaning on the counter. "We have some king-sized futons if you'd rather have a look at those." Without batting an eyelash, Naruto replied. "We're not going out." Ino winced slightly at how bluntly he'd denied it. His tone of voice left no room for argument, and while she certainly didn't view him as a romantic prospect, it still kind of annoyed her that he hadn't even hesitated with his answer. As if not noticing Naruto's tone, the man continued. "Shame. This kid's gonna be big in a few years. Grab him while you can." Ignoring the glares of both teenagers, he looked at the tag on the futon before whistling and speaking again. "Wow. This is a damn old item. I'm surprised it was still back there. Tell you what. How about a 30% discount? I need to get rid of this thing before my reputation goes down for having old stock." Ecstatic, Ino's face broke out into a wide smile. "Really? Thanks. Naruto, thank the man. I'm not the one buying it." Ino frowned again, noticing his steadily declining mood. She'd have to talk to him when they got out of earshot of anyone else. She paid for the futon and thanked the clerk before leading him outside. As soon as she was sure they couldn't be heard by the man inside, Ino placed her hands on her hips, shopping bag dangling from her fingertips. "What was up with that? He gave us a discount and you barely thanked him." Annoyingly, Naruto ignored her question and kept walking. Stomping her foot, Ino marched up behind him and yelled at his back. "Naruto." Deciding to shut her up once and for all, he sighed loudly and began to speak. "When I was 6, I started living on my own. I was excited about getting to shop by myself for the first time and came here to get bedding. Instead of helping me, he said that demons deserved to sleep on the floor and chased me out with a broom. I tripped on my way out, and then he started hitting me with it. I tried to get up and run, but he just kept hitting me. No matter how much I screamed and cried, he wouldn't stop. I didn't get away until an Anbu officer showed up and stopped him. I guess he thought I forgot. Ino was unable to speak. She'd heard about how hard he'd had it from Sakura, but for that bastard to pretend that he'd never wronged Naruto was unforgivable. When he turned around to face her with moist eyes, the Yamanaka felt her heart crumble. God, she wanted to hug him. Instead, she simply stared back into his eyes with as remorseful of an expression as she could manage. I'm sorry. Giving her a smile, Naruto replied. Don't be. They walked for a few more seconds in silence, neither of them knowing what to say. Suddenly, Ino stopped in the middle of the street, her mouth tightened into an angry thin line. You know what? I'm taking this back. Him and his discount. I'm not going to support a bastard like that. Naruto groaned inwardly. Ino, that was a long time ago. He's probably forgotten all about it. Let's just go. No. She turned on her heel and stomped back into the store. A few seconds later, he heard her yelling at the man, using words he'd only heard in some of the slummier places Jiraiya had dragged him to over the years. To say he was shocked by the action would be an understatement. She was actually willing to give up a ridiculous discount on an already dirt cheap item to defend him. She stomped out of the store a couple of minutes later, a handful of cash in her hand and a vicious scowl on her face. Come on, I know another place that sells futons. Without even thinking about it, she grabbed his hand and led him down the street, swear words slipping from her lips every few seconds as she verbally berated the old man for being such a bigoted asshole. Naruto felt a slow smile creep onto his face. She didn't know it yet, but at that moment, Ino had managed to work herself into the ranks of his precious people. Ino stared at her reflection in the mirror, turning her head every which way to make sure that she looked every bit as good as the current unofficial, Wyest teen kunoichi of the year, should. Reasonably pleased with her face and hair, she smirked and shot herself a wink. She couldn't wait. Starting today, she'd finally be able to step foot into the prison and her training with the torture and interrogation department would officially begin. Glancing at the clock resting on the dresser, that she'd picked up for cheap at a yard sale, Ino quickly made her way to the kitchen to begin preparing for the day. Since she and Naruto would be spending pretty much all day at the prison, she not only had to prepare their breakfast, but also their lunches and a snack for that dead period in between lunch and dinner. Based on what she'd learned from current interrogation squad members, they wouldn't have much time to rest, let alone go out to buy something to eat, and the food in the prison cafeteria was both horrible and horribly overpriced. It was important that she make something that would be both filling and give them a lot of stamina. She opened the refrigerator and reached for the 2 packs of eel she'd picked up the day before. While unagi wasn't cheap, it was loaded in protein, calcium, and vitamins A and E. It was rumored to provide mass amounts of stamina, and it also promoted healthy brain function. Not to mention it was ridiculously tender and delicious when cooked correctly. A small smile came to her face as she realized what she was doing. The way she was planning her meals based on their nutrition level almost made her seem like a housewife. Wincing slightly, Ino squashed this train of thought. If she was a housewife, then that would make Naruto her husband. Even though they'd become almost like best friends over the short 2 months that they'd been living together, picturing him as anything more than a friend, let alone her husband, wasn't something she'd ever be ready for. Ino shook her head and moved to start cooking the rice, deciding that they'd be having unagi rice bowls, also known as unadon, for breakfast, and unagi sushi for lunch. She admittedly wasn't so great at making sushi, but reasoning that it was a special day, it was worth trying. Humming happily to herself, she carefully rolled the tamagoyaki until it resembled the desired shape, pleased that everything was actually going well for once. Though Naruto didn't know it given his limited experience with real food, she often ate up on the dishes she was trying to make. She had a really bad habit of undercooking the vegetables, and more often than not, the tamagoyaki she made was overcooked. It was a wonder that neither of them had gotten sick yet. She glanced over all of the dishes one final time to make sure that she hadn't forgotten anything, and pleased that everything seemed perfect and ready, she began to move the dishes to the dining table. Hopefully Naruto liked the taste of eel, as that was basically all they were eating that day. Just as she finished setting the last bowl down, Naruto emerged from his bedroom, groggy and bleary-eyed. Without so much as a glance in her direction, he pulled out his chair and plopped down, reaching for his chopsticks and staring down at the large amount of food resting before him. "Good morning," Ino chirped, shooting him her brightest smile as she mimicked his actions. A little surprised by her exuberant greeting, Naruto could only manage a small grunt in reply. With a mumbled, "Itadakimasu," the blonde dug in, going for the strange brown meat first as he'd never seen it before. Feeling a little trepidation, he lifted it to his mouth and took a bite. To his amazement, the strange brown meat actually tasted good. It was sweet, but it also contained a slight bitterness that perfectly balanced out the taste. "What's this?" Naruto asked, looking up at her for the first time. Feeling oddly pleased that he seemed to be enjoying it so much, she couldn't help the grin that appeared on her face at his question. "Eel. Good, right." He nodded and continued to eat, slowing down a bit to savor the flavor. The more he ate, the more he liked it. It was only after finishing his unadon that he noticed a strange noise coming from across the table. He glanced up at Ino and raised his eyebrows, noticing the chipper little tune she was humming as she ate. It was a little disconcerting to see the normally somewhat bitchy Ino so cheerful. "Why are you so happy?" he asked, unable to hide his curiosity. Her smile widening, Ino answered. "Because we finally get to start our training at the prison. How can I not be excited?" "Oh, was that today?" Naruto mumbled around his chopsticks. Ino nearly dropped her utensils, the smile she'd had on her face disappearing in favor of a disbelieving frown. "Are you serious?" Naruto shrugged his shoulders distractedly, shoveling another mouthful of food into his mouth. After passing the first exam, he and Ino had been subjected to a host of other tests and training simulations. They'd been drilled on what to do in the event of a jailbreak, how to interact with prisoners, and basically how not to things up. While there had been 12 applicants at the end of the first exam, by the end of all the testing, only 7 remained. The others had either quit or were deemed insufficient for the program. It had taken them over a month of rigorous testing to get to this point. Personally, he was glad that it was over. He hadn't intended on actually joining the interrogation squad, but after passing that first test, the Godime had all but forced him to join, claiming that it'd be a good learning experience that would help him become a better Hokage in the future. On the bright side, he only had to stay in the torture and interrogation department for 3 months. After that, he could, and would, quit. Of course, Ino had been staying with him the entire time, continuing her cooking duties and even taking it upon herself to do little things like cleaning and laundry. He'd also noticed a small increase in the amount of furniture in his apartment. Just the other day she'd bought a second-hand dresser from God knows where, and before that, she'd somehow slipped a full-screen mirror past him. Not that he minded. In fact, he was secretly happy that she seemed to be growing more and more comfortable with the idea of living with him. Besides all of the free meals, it was also nice having someone to talk to for a change. Considering the fact that they used to hate each other back in the academy, Naruto found it amazing that they were getting along so well. If only she wasn't so eager to have a career that involved constantly hearing the screams of captured criminals. His face dropping into a small frown, he stabbed at a piece of egg and shoved it into his mouth. "Torturing people isn't really my idea of a fun time. Don't talk with your mouth full," Ino quipped, a little upset that he was basically putting down her goals. Rolling his eyes, the young man gave her a sarcastic reply. "Yes, Mom." They ate the rest of their meal in an awkward silence, neither of them particularly interested in saying anything to the other. It was safe to say that he'd ruined her good mood with his bad one. Sadly, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. With both of them being strong-headed, stubborn, short-tempered shinobi, there were bound to be a few spats every now and then. Usually they were over stupid things like who got to use the bathroom first or Naruto sneaking food away from the fridge, so their fights never lasted long, 5 or 6 hours at the most. That was great, Naruto said, looking and sounding much more awake than he'd been only 15 minutes before. Now that he was thinking more clearly, he was a little remorseful for what he'd said, and was attempting to make amends without looking like a complete pushover. Unfortunately, his efforts appeared to be in vain. Get dressed, we have to be at the prison in half an hour. Not ready to give up, Naruto stood up and sighed. I didn't mean it in a bad way. What I said before. Rather than answer, Ino continued to clear the table of their dishes, face schooled into a cool, neutral expression. To the untrained eye, she looked annoyed at best. To Naruto, she looked pissed. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. If she wanted to be mad, then let her. The entire thing was stupid anyway, since what he'd said hadn't even been that bad. All he did was give her his opinion. Feeling himself start to get angry, he shook his head and walked out of the room. It was going to be a long day. Naruto and Ino, along with 5 other trainees, stood in front of a large wooden door. 2 Anbu officers were positioned on either side of it, and though they were very well hidden, Naruto could sense 4 or 5 more jumping around in the treetops. The prison was over 10 miles outside of the village, surrounded by nothing but dirt, trees, rocks, and layers upon layers of complex concealing genjutsu. Unless you knew exactly where the prison was, the complex was impossible to find, and if you by some small chance were skilled or lucky enough to get within half a mile of it, chances were the Anbu would be on you before you could get any closer. All 7 of the trainees had been blindfolded and led out to the building, and they wouldn't be able to learn the prison's position until they officially made it through their training. After a few more minutes of waiting, the door to the prison suddenly slammed open, startling a few of the Chunin trainees. Morino Ibiki, the head of the torture and interrogation department, emerged from the darkness of the open doorway. Unlike when they'd seen him during the Chunin exams and their first department exam, he was alone. The scarred man stared down at them with what looked like a mixture of contempt and impassiveness, his stern dark eyes seeming to bore into all of theirs at once. Starting today, all of you are in a probationary period. 15 days from now we will judge your midterm performance to determine whether or not you are a good fit, and at the end of 30 days, you will be evaluated again and either offered a job or let go. He paused briefly to judge their reactions, staring at each of them for a good second or two before continuing. I'll tell you this now, not even half of you will make it into torture and interrogation, Ibiki said, face devoid of emotion. This is a difficult job, and not everyone is cut out for it. You'll have to deal with S-ranked criminals on a daily basis. Criminals that have the ability to kill you with little more than a glance or spoken phrase. If you'd like to leave, please do so at this point. 5 full, tense minutes followed his statement as he waited for someone to step out of line and leave. Naruto struggled not to smirk. This was almost the same exact tactic he'd used during the Chunin exams, basically, leave now and live to fight another day, or take your chances and hope for the best. It hadn't worked then, and it sure as hell wouldn't work now. Glancing over at the other trainees, he could see that most of them were beginning to get nervous. Small beads of sweat were beginning to break out on their foreheads, and their eyes shifted from side to side as they also tried to evaluate their comrades' mental states to decide what they were going to do. Naruto noticed with a small amount of surprise and pride that Ino was looking straight ahead, expression calm and eyes focused on nothing but the dark, open doorway in front of her. She didn't look nervous in the least, though that wasn't too much of a surprise considering that she was a Junin and had gone through much tougher shit than the Chunins standing next to them. Finally, When no one moved, the scarred man turned towards the large steel door of the torture and interrogation department and knocked on it a few times before uttering a low phrase that none of them managed to catch. Almost instantly, the door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness. "Follow me," he commanded, already out of sight. The trainees awkwardly stood around, none of them willing to take the first step. Taking a deep breath, Ino stepped forward into the darkness. She'd worked too damn hard and gone through too much shit to let a little thing like darkness stop her from achieving her goals. The others soon followed, and surprisingly, the opposite side of the darkness wasn't black at all. "A genjutsu," Naruto muttered, slightly annoyed that he'd been taken in by such an obvious scare tactic. It wasn't even that scary considering Ibiki himself had walked through the door first. "All of you followed. Good," Ibiki praised, standing next to a broad-shouldered blonde man. A man that both Ino and Naruto recognized, with a slight intake of breath, as Ino's father. The man instantly turned his steely blue gaze on Ino, staring at her for an intense 5 seconds. Though his face showed neither approval nor disapproval, Ino felt herself begin to sweat. Luckily, he turned his eyes away from her and looked over at Naruto, fixing him with a similar stare. Despite his best efforts, the young man couldn't help but gulp. "My name is Yamanaka Inoichi, and I am the second in command of the torture and interrogation department." He grabbed a large stack of books from the desk behind him and began to hand them out to the trainees. "This is a handbook containing all of our rules and procedures. Take it home and memorize it by next week." Ino's jaw almost dropped. By next week. The book was almost as thick as her arm. In between working in the department, sleeping, and cooking, that left her no time for herself. "This morning, we'll take a tour around the prison so that you can get acclimated with your surroundings. After lunch, we'll be assigning you some simple low-level work to see how you do. Do not brush this work off, we'll be watching you closely." As if they'd rehearsed this dozens of times, Ibiki stepped forward. "Any questions?" he asked, knowing full well what the answer would be. No one was particularly eager to call attention to themselves. "Good, let's continue." They moved to follow the scarred Junin out of the room, but before Naruto could even take a step, Inoichi stepped in front of him. "Uzumaki, I want to speak with you." Ino and Naruto exchanged fearful glances. Did he know? How had he followed Ino to Naruto's apartment? Even though he'd stared down some of the most fearsome criminals known to the ninja world, locking eyes with Ino's dad was easily one of the most frightening experiences of his young life. What's up, Yamanaka-san?" Naruto could smack himself. What's up? What the hell was that? Not only was the elder blonde his current boss, but the guy could his brain 2 ways from Sunday if he so desired. He might as well have said, "Hey, your daughter's living with me and I've almost seen her twice. By the way, she has great tits." Which would be true, but suicidal. "I just thought I'd congratulate you on making it so far in this program. I have to admit, I honestly didn't think you'd do so well." "Thanks," Naruto awkwardly replied, not sure how to respond to that. It was kind of a backhanded compliment. As if the situation wasn't weird enough, Inoichi reached out his hand and placed it on Naruto's shoulder. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I know this must sound strange coming out of nowhere, but you have a lot of potential, Naruto. I don't want you to waste it." Giving him one last grin, Inoichi turned and walked down one of the prison's many corridors. After waiting a few seconds to slow down his furiously thumping heart, Naruto also left to follow the rest of the group. His legs threatened to give out on him with every step, and he could barely believe that he'd gotten out of that situation alive. It was funny. Had Inoichi been an enemy shinobi from a different village, he wouldn't have been frightened in the least. He'd have faced him like he faced everyone else, head held high and with balls of steel. The fact that he was Ino's father, well, that changed everything. He walked into the room with Ibiki and the other trainees, instantly noticing Ino's curious, panicked stare. Wanting to put her at ease, he quickly shot her a small smile in an attempt to show her that everything was okay. It seemed to work as her brows instantly unknitted themselves, though the puzzled frown on her face remained. Still, her eyes narrowed as she gave him a look that clearly said, "We'll talk later." 9 hours and 2 breaks later, Naruto raised his face to the sky and took a deep breath, glad to finally be free. He couldn't understand why anyone would want to be cooped up inside of a prison all day. Missions and training were a million times more fun. The sunshine on your face, the feel of the wind caressing you as you jumped through the trees, the smell of the earth filling your nostrils, there was nothing better. His stomach growled noisily. Despite being angry at him, Ino had still managed to discreetly slip him his lunch and a snack. Her reasons for not eating with him were simple. If someone, more specifically, her father, saw that they were eating the same exact things, it probably wouldn't end too well. While he could certainly see her point, he knew the real reason why she really didn't want to eat with him. She was still pissed. If there was one piece of advice that Jiraiya had drilled into his head, it was that women always held a grudge. Always. The light sound of jogging footsteps and he slowly turned around to see Ino staring up at him impatiently. "Hey, what did my dad want?" she asked, trying, and failing, to sound as casual as possible. A little surprised that she was speaking to him, he lifted his eyebrows. "He wanted to congratulate me for passing the exam." Ino's face instantly morphed into a mixture of shock and appall. He what?" Ino gasped. "Yeah, I was surprised too. That bastard. Oh, he can congratulate you, but he can't say, 'Hey, great job,' to his own daughter." She kicked a conveniently placed rock with all of her strength, sending the stone flying into the village. Naruto hoped that whoever was in the path of it would be quick enough to get out of the way. "What's so special about you? Hey, don't get mad at me. I didn't ask your dad to praise me." Ino sighed and rubbed a hand over her face. I know. I just don't get why he's being such a jerk. Your dad's probably just worried about you. I mean, you saw the guys in there. They were practically drooling over you. Well, that's nothing new. He should be used to it by now." The young woman paused. "Are you jealous?" she asked after a couple of seconds, eyes glowing with amusement. Her anger was temporarily forgotten in favor of the stricken look that had appeared on Naruto's face. "What? No way. What the hell are you talking about? Relax, Naruto, I'm just kidding. I know you're in love with Sakura and everything," Ino teased, smile dropping a bit. Surprisingly enough, Naruto's first thought was to deny Ino's accusation. Something about the way she'd said it had made it sound fake. Like he shouldn't love her. Then again, he hadn't seen Sakura in almost 2 months, and because Ino had basically been living with him since their last meeting, he hadn't really thought much about her either. "Yeah," he mumbled after a few seconds, a little shocked at how unsure he sounded. They walked along in silence for a while, neither of them really knowing what to say next. Despite having over 3 miles to walk until they got back to the village, both were comfortable taking their time, using the trek through the forest as a way to unwind after a day of nothing but tests, busy work, and training procedures. As if just remembering something, Naruto grabbed her wrist to stop her. She stared down at his hand before looking up at him with a questioning gaze. Naruto took a deep breath before opening his mouth to speak. "Since you're talking to me again, I guess this is as good of a time as any to give you this." He pulled a small gift bag from his pocket and held it out to her. Ino gawked at the gift in disbelief, eyes widening with surprise. When he'd said he was going to give her something, she had half expected him to pull out a kunai and stab her through the heart. "What is it?" she asked, looking up at him with a suspicious glare. "It's for you. Open it." Still in a mild state of shock, she gingerly grabbed the package and stared at it. "But why? I thought we were fighting." Naruto shrugged his shoulders. "Yeah, well, I was going to give it to you anyway before you decided to get all pissy. Just open it already." Slowly nodding her head, She opened the little bag and glanced inside. A small, plastic keychain was inside, molded into the shape of a few interlocked wildflowers. She lifted the keychain from the bag, and surprisingly, there was a key connected to the end of it. Is this? Since you seem to be moving in already, I thought I'd make it more official. I mean, I'm not saying you have to live with me or anything, but I thought it'd more convenient if you had a key of your own and. Before he could finish, Ino launched herself full force at him. I love you. You are seriously the best friend ever. She exclaimed, squeezing him as tightly as she could. He didn't really get it for her because he thought it'd make her happy. He just bought it because it would make both of their lives easier. Still, the warm feeling in his chest made him feel good, so he slowly closed his eyes and allowed himself to get lost in her embrace. Hugging Ino was almost one of the most comfortable things he'd ever felt. His eyes popped open at this train of thought. Shit. He was getting far too used to the feeling of her body against his. Ino was a lot more touchy-feely than the rest of his friends, and it seemed like she was constantly finding an excuse to hug him. He gently pushed her away, looking down at her with a smile. He had to stop this. Stop her from getting too close. Ino, he started, hands holding onto her upper arms. Looking into her curious bright blue eyes and wide, glistening smile, he found that he couldn't finish his sentence. Quote. I'm excited about living together. It should be fun. I know. She moved as if to hug him again, and thinking quickly, Naruto stepped out of her immediate hugging range. By now his heart was thumping powerfully in his chest. I just remembered that I have to go to the library for something, he said, taking a few steps back. He didn't want to lie to her, but he couldn't think of any other way to get away. Nodding, Ino began to follow. Cool, I'll come with you. Naruto's smile dropped. No, that's okay. It'll probably be done in a few hours. I really don't mind. I don't have anything else to do today. Ino explained, not catching the hint. It'd be faster if I just went by myself. Sensing that he really didn't want her to go with him, Ino frowned, confused by his sudden change in mood. Oh, okay. Well, okay. I'll be home around dinner time. 8, right? He asked, relieved that she was giving up. Yeah, 8. Shooting her a small, uneasy grin, Naruto jogged ahead to get to town faster. Ino stared after him, her expression darkening. Something was wrong. She racked her brain for a reason, but she honestly couldn't understand what had freaked him out so much. It couldn't have been the hugs since he never seemed to mind them much before, and she'd pretty much agreed to officially move in with him. What the hell was his problem? The woman let loose a frustrated sigh. Naruto was a mystery. This fact was nothing new, of course, and she probably thought about it at least once a day, but even after 2 months she hadn't been able to figure out anything substantial about him. She kicked another stone and sent it flying, hoping that whoever was in its path was too slow to get out of the way. He didn't know what to think. What to do. He wasn't stupid enough to believe that Ino liked him as anything more than a friend, though. Almost every guy in Konoha, and even a few women, wanted her. He walked aimlessly for a while, killing time and allowing his heart to relax a bit before he had to return home. Unfortunately, he'd wandered a little too close to the hospital, and before he could run, Sakura emerged from the large building. She stared at him disbelief, eyes bright and wide. Hey, Naruto, she called, jogging up to him with a wide smile. Naruto blanched. All of the emotions he'd felt that first night came rushing back, swirling around in his brain until he felt sick. He swallowed his anger as she approached, somehow managing to piece together a neutral smile. I haven't seen you in months. What have you been up to? I heard you passed the test for the torture and interrogation department. Congratulations. We should grab something to celebrate and catch up, she said, completely oblivious to the shakiness of his smile and the subtle twitching of his shoulders. Getting a grip on his feelings, Naruto forced himself to speak. I just ate, he lied, avoiding her smiling gaze. Well, We should still go somewhere to talk. You've seriously been like a ghost these past couple of months. Everyone is always saying that I just missed you, so I was wondering if you were avoiding me. Did you get yourself a girlfriend? She joked, leaning forward to nudge his arm. The blonde almost sneered. Of course she was always just missing him. He could sense her chakra from a mile away, and if she was within even a quarter of a mile of him, he would quickly run in the other direction. It had worked up to this point, but since he'd had other things on his mind, he wasn't exactly thinking about Sakura. Feeling annoyed by her patronizing tone, Naruto snapped. What? Do you think I couldn't? Do you think I'm too stupid for anyone to ever fall in love with me? Taken aback by his outburst, Sakura glanced around to make sure no one was watching before addressing him again. Luckily, there were only 2 or 3 people on the street, and they were way too far away to hear their conversation. Naruto, I don't have time for this. For you. I'm busy. Okay. Stepping around her, Naruto moved to head back home. He'd much rather deal with Ino and her ambiguous actions than Sakura. She quickly caught up to him and slammed her hand onto his shoulder, using her inhuman strength to turn him around. You're not going anywhere until you tell me what the hell is going on with you. Is it something I did? Something I said? If you'd just talk to me. Naruto began to feel himself zone out as she spoke. He loved the way her pink lips shined and crinkled with each syllable, and he couldn't help but lick his own lips at the way her green eyes shined with unshed tears as she tried to understand him. Before he knew what he was doing, he suddenly leaned down and pressed his lips against hers, cutting her off before she could finish her sentence. Sakura's eyes opened wide in surprise, and immediately after, she slapped him painfully across the face. They stared at each other, both shocked by what she'd done. Naruto. What? Why sigh? He asked, voice shaky as he struggled to keep himself together. The pain in his heart greatly outweighed the stinging pain in his cheek. Her eyes lowered to the ground. I like him. He's good to me, and he likes me, too. Sai doesn't like you, Naruto yelled, drawing attention from some passers-by. He's Sai. He doesn't feel anything. And good to you. What about all of the things I've done for you? I know, and I appreciate them, but we're only friends. I just don't feel that way about you. Without another word, Naruto turned around and walked away. Wait. Naruto, Sakura started, jumping to catch him. Feeling his anger spike, the blonde reeled on her. You know, I hope you don't regret picking Sai over me. Have fun living with the fact that you made the wrong decision. Although he was angry, Naruto winced. His statement had been completely unnecessary and had only served to make himself look like the immature brat she still thought he was. Just as quickly as his guilt had arrived, it left. Her. He'd spent almost 10 years of his life trying to get Sakura to notice him, but this was it. He knew he wasn't that great, but he was 1,000 levels above Sai. Ignoring the pointing and whispering of the nearby villagers, Naruto smoothly walked away with his head held as high as he could manage. Practically stomping up the steps to his apartment, Naruto pushed his key into the lock and slammed the door open. He pulled off his jacket and threw it, not caring in the least where it landed. Surprised by his sudden entrance, Ino almost jumped up from the couch, the book she was reading falling to the floor. Naruto, you're back early. I just started dinner, so it'll be another 45 minutes. When she noticed the look on his face, she quickly strode across the room to comfort him. Hey, are you okay? What's wrong? Letting loose a frustrated sigh, Naruto turned his glare on Ino. What is with everyone thinking that there's something wrong with me? Do I really look that pathetic? You're not pathetic, Naruto, I'm just worried about you. You left in such a hurry before, so I was wondering what had happened. Naruto felt his anger begin to dissipate as he saw the concern in her eyes. At least someone gave a shit about him. He knew it was suicide, and he knew that it was incredibly stupid, but he couldn't help himself. Cupping her cheek in one hand, he jammed his lips against hers. Unlike his experience with Sakura, Though, Ino didn't slap him. She stood still for a couple of seconds as if she was trying to process what he was doing, but once she figured it out, she leaned further into him, deepening the kiss. Her hands instantly around his back, and her hips pressed lightly against his. The fragrance of her soap was driving him crazy, making him more aggressive with each passing moment. It also didn't help that she had changed from her regular shinobi gear and was only wearing a pair of shorts and a small, thin t-shirt. After a few seconds of kissing, it became obvious to Naruto that he didn't know what the hell he was doing and that she did. She'd grabbed his hands and placed them on her waist, basically telling him where she wanted him to go. Her own arms slid up to wrap around his neck, bringing his face down closer to hers. Every now and then her tongue would brush against his lips, sending sharp, electric sparks down his spine. Feeling his neck begin to tire from having to bend down, Naruto picked her up and walked her over to the dining table. He set her down on the edge and grabbed her bare thighs to hold her in place. The books that had been resting there were shoved haphazardly to the floor, making a thumping noise as they bounced off of the hardwood surface. He was so focused on kissing her that he barely noticed her hands sliding up the front of his shirt to touch his chest, nor her legs crossing behind his lower back to pull him closer. Ino was the first to break the kiss, placing short, precise kisses on his neck and eliciting a low groan from the Jinchuriki. Just as her hands dropped to his pants, she suddenly stopped and pulled back to look him in the eyes, breath coming in short, deep pants. "Why?" she breathed, eyes unfocused and lips puffy. Rather than answer her question, Naruto leaned forward and tried to kiss her again, only to be foiled by her hand on his chest. "Naruto, stop it. We have to stop. This is wrong. We live together now." He rested his lips on her neck. "So," he mumbled, tickling her. "It's not right. We don't like each other like that." Naruto slowly removed his hands from her legs and stood up, a frown settling onto his face. Ino could literally see the betrayal in his eyes, and it hurt her to see him this way. "I'm sorry, Naruto. This was a mistake." While she should have just stopped there, her mouth decided to keep going. "I've just been so alone without my parents or my friends, and I haven't been on a mission lately, so I have all of this pent-up energy and it's okay. It was my fault. Let's just pretend none of this happened." Ino furrowed her eyebrows. There was something he wasn't telling her. "What happened, Naruto?" "Nothing." Her mouth tightening into a thin line, Ino grabbed his face in her hand and forced him to stare at her. "Look at me. What happened? What did he have to lose? He'd already been completely rejected by two of his best friends. Why not spill everything?" "So," with his eyes watering, Naruto confessed. "I talked to Sakura. She's in love with Sai. She's really in love with him and there's nothing I can do about it." Rather than say anything, Ino wrapped her arms around his head and pulled it into her chest. She felt his body tremble as he struggled to hold in his emotions. It was a losing battle, however, and a drop of water splashed onto her bare thigh. As soon as he realized that he was crying, Naruto quickly slipped out of her grip and turned away, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. God, he was weak. He sniffled loudly and walked towards his room. "I'm going to sleep. You don't have to make dinner or anything." She started to stop him, but at the last moment, she changed her mind. Leaving him alone was probably the best thing she could do for him at this moment, even if it killed her to do so. She placed her fingertips on her lips, the memory of their brief make-out session still fresh in her mind. While she knew that it was wrong, and she knew that this was only a one-time thing, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to kiss him again. Ino sat at her large wooden desk, eyes glued to the page of a particularly thick and old-looking book. She was trying her best to read it, but for the life of her, she couldn't concentrate on what the words were saying. Not that it wasn't interesting. There were a surprisingly large number of ways to break a man, and nearly every one of them seemed to be more interesting and vicious than the last. Anko had recommended it to her as light reading, leading the blonde to wonder what the hell heavy reading for the snake Junin was. No, She couldn't concentrate on the book because her thoughts kept shifting back to Naruto. He'd left without eating breakfast that morning, giving her little more than a grunt as he passed by her on his way out the door. It was obvious by his demeanor that he didn't want her to bother him. Yamanaka. Not that she could blame him. It was kind of a mean thing to think, but the boy was pitiful. He'd been rejected by his longtime crush, and though they hadn't been close for nearly as long, she had also pushed Naruto away. Granted, it had been a Herculean effort for her to stop him, but she'd still done it. Yamanaka. It wasn't until the woman slammed her hand on the desk did Ino finally jump and look up from her book. Get it together, Yamanaka. Seeing that she had the blonde's attention, the woman continued. It's time to feed the prisoners. Really? Ino asked with interest, closing her book and standing up to stretch. The torture and interrogation department wasn't nearly as fun as she'd thought it would be, so getting to do something like this was a rare and welcomed opportunity. For low-level members like herself, most of their day consisted of filling out paperwork, filing, and if they were lucky, booking civilians. That was it. No interrogating, no interaction with the prisoners, and worst of all, no torture. She was beginning to wonder if all the menial labor they were being subjected to was worth it. Yeah, there are some real hotties in there, the woman said as she grabbed a large set of metal keys from the hook on the wall. There's this one guy in C block that's just gorgeous. The guy could be a model if he wasn't a homicidal, schizophrenic, child-raping lunatic. The blonde paused and shot Anko an incredulous stare, unable to believe the words that had come from her mouth. Quote. Are you serious? The purple-haired Junin shrugged. Hey, just because they're sick and evil doesn't mean that they can't be hot. Those are the ones that I love to make cry the most. Ino took a discreet step away from the woman, giving her a small, nervous laugh. She'd heard that there were some crazy S in the torture and interrogation department, and it was just her dumb luck that she'd gotten stuck with the craziest one. On the other hand, she couldn't deny that Anko knew her shit. Besides giving her heaps of advice on how to quickly move up in the department, she'd also given her a suggested reading list of books on subjects like psychoanalyzation and torture. Even if she was missing a few hundred screws, she was still a valuable resource. You know who else I'd like to put under my heel? That Uzumaki kid. Ino once again stopped in her tracks, eyes widening slightly at the statement. It took her a few seconds, but she was eventually able to speak. Naruto. Yeah, he's just my type, Anko grinned, a wide, crazed smile appearing on her face. Cute, innocent, and bullheaded. How long do you think it'd take me to break him? 1 hour. 2. The woman was practically salivating at the thought of getting a few hours alone with Naruto, and to be frank, it pissed Ino off. It was one thing to want to break a prisoner. It was another to want to torture her friend. Don't touch him, Ino hissed, surprising herself with the intensity of her anger. She could almost taste the venom on her tongue as she spoke. Noticing this, Anko turned around and fixed the blonde with a curious stare. Why not? Though her tone was light, her eyes carried an unmistakably dangerous look. It was almost as if she was daring Ino to say something out of place, and realizing what would happen if she continued mouthing off, the Yamanaka swallowed her anger and decided to choose her words carefully. He's a friend. Remember the rookie 9? Almost instantly, the scary look in Anko's eyes disappeared. Yeah, I remember that. Your dad was talking about it for months after the exams had ended, bragging about how his baby girl almost made it to the final round on her first try. So Uzumaki was part of the rookie 9 too, huh? As if suddenly remembering something, the Junin snapped her fingers and pointed at Ino. That's right, he was one of Kakashi's kids. That gives me even more reason to with him. I'm serious, the teenager frowned, feeling like she was getting nowhere. Leave him alone. Don't be such a stiff, Yamanaka. You're just as anal as your dad. I am not. I'm nothing like him. Well, when other guys so much as mention your name he freaks out. You should have seen what happened to the last prisoner who mentioned that he wanted to. Anko paused and rubbed her chin, eyes rolling towards the ceiling in thought. Actually, what the hell ever happened to that guy? Ignoring this disturbing new piece of information, Ino persisted. Do you promise not to touch him? Naruto, I mean. The woman fixed the girl with an even stare, boring her light brown eyes into the blonde's cornflower blue ones. After a couple of seconds, she shrugged nonchalantly and turned around, a tiny smirk appearing on her face. Fine, whatever. There are plenty of other toys in here to keep me occupied. I'll leave your boyfriend alone. Ino started to deny that he was her boyfriend, but changed her mind at the last second. As long as Anko was going to leave him alone, she could think whatever she wanted. They walked into the prison cafeteria where the normal prisoners were already sitting down for lunch. All of the guys in this area were either civilians or genin-level shinobi with their chakra coils blocked, so they were of little to no threat to the two kunoichi. No one was willing to take on two junins who had the ability to both mentally and physically them up. Anko led Ino to the back of the room where 15 or so trays sat waiting for them. These are the lunches we serve to the guys in maximum security. Here. She picked up the stack and shoved them into the blonde's arms, effectively cutting off her line of sight. Let's go. With Ino stumbling along behind her, the older Junin backtracked through the cafeteria until they reached the maximum security cells. These guys were Junin level or above, and even with their chakra coils blocked, they were considered highly dangerous. She stopped in front of the first cell and turned to her temporary apprentice. Okay. Basic rundown. Lift the hatch and slide the tray underneath it. Do not let your hands get anywhere near the door. Unless you're me, that is. Shooting Ino a conspiratorial wink, she lifted the hatch and slid the tray inside the door, deliberately letting her hand get a little too close to the opening. Almost instantly, the large, grubby hand of the prisoner shot out of the opening to grab her, only to be impaled by Anko's kunai. Ino winced at the horrified scream the man let loose. Are you allowed to do that? She asked. Anko shrugged. I can do whatever the hell I want. I'm the guard, they're the prisoner. Still, the girl was unconvinced. What if the wound gets infected and he gets sick? He'll be taking up hospital resources if we have to treat him later. You should let me take a look at that now while it's still fresh. The woman seemed to consider this for a few seconds, and realizing that the teenager was right, rolled her eyes and kicked the metal door. Hey, shitface. If you want to be healed, stick your hand out again. Oh, but if you try anything, I'll take the whole thing off. The other side of the door was silent except for the man's heavy pants, but after a few short seconds, he tentatively stuck the damaged appendage through the small slit in the door. Ino instantly fell to her knees and began to heal the wound, hands glowing with the skills she'd learned from Tsunade. After a few seconds of this, the hole gradually began to close and stitch together until there was nothing but a large, pink scar left. See, all it takes is a little creative intimidation to get men to do what you want. Remember that, Yamanaka. Ino resisted the urge to reply with something snide inside. Getting on Anko's bad side probably wasn't a good idea. Right. An hour after feeding the prisoners, Ino went to the prison break room to grab her own lunch. Unsurprisingly, Naruto wasn't there. She glanced in the fridge to see that the food she'd made that morning was still sitting in the back of the icebox wrapped in a couple of nondescript handkerchiefs. She wasn't too worried about any of the other trainees stealing their food. She'd placed a hasty genjutsu on their lunches, making it so that if anyone opened the box, they'd see and smell nothing but rotten rice and spoiled eggs. It wouldn't fool any of the more experienced members of the department, but they usually went out for lunch anyway. Grabbing their bento boxes, she spared her fellow trainees a small smile and wave and strode out of the room, intent on finding Naruto before their hour lunch break was up. Trying to recall things Sakura had said about Naruto, Ino walked to the front door of the compound, and immediately after getting outside, she took to the trees. If she remembered correctly, he liked high places, more specifically, the top of the fourth Hokage's head. Since that was way Way too far from the torture and interrogation department, she decided to look for someplace a bit closer. She applied some chakra to her feet and ran up the tallest tree she could find. She shielded her eyes and looked around, and spotting a ridiculously tall rocky hill in the distance, Ino grinned. Bingo! She hopped down from the tree and began to jog towards where she assumed her friend to be, food held carefully in her left hand. It only took a few minutes for her to reach the hill, and smiling wider as she picked out the small orange speck resting on top of it. Taking a small breath, the blonde smoothly hopped her way to the top until she was standing right behind him. Hey, I've got your lunch, she said, holding out one of the boxes towards him with a small amount of triumph. Naruto, not quite meeting her eyes, turned in her direction. Thanks, he mumbled, reluctantly taking the large wrapped box from her. He set it down on the rock next to him without so much as a second glance at it. You should go somewhere else. Don't want your dad seeing us eating the same thing. Anko says he's on a mission until tomorrow. It's safe enough since I don't think anyone else is particularly interested in following me around. Naruto nodded his head towards an especially thick area of vegetation to their left. There are 2 Anbu officers watching us right now. People talk. I'll take my chances, Ino shrugged, not bothering to see if he was telling the truth or not. Before he could say anything else, she brushed the dirt off of the rock next to him and sat down, shoulder bumping into his. So, listen, we get our first week's pay today, and I was thinking that we could go out and get something to eat to celebrate. Nothing fancy, but no ramen either. There's this great restaurant near. I actually have a mission this weekend, he said, cutting her off. It starts a couple hours after I finish here, and I need to get my things together. She couldn't hide the disappointed frown that appeared on her face if she tried. She'd spent all morning thinking of some excuse to get him to go out with her, and he'd shot it down with what seemed like little remorse. Oh, with Shika? She asked, remembering her teammate mentioning that he had a mission today. Yeah, where? A megacur. Ino frowned. It wasn't terribly long ago that AIM had started rebuilding, and though it was way better now than it was when Pain ruled the village, there were still a fair amount of crazies milling around who believed that their god would rise from the dead and return one day. On any given day, a person could see one of the crazies walking around with a sign that said, Pain-sama is coming. Or, the world is ending. Are you ready? It was actually kind of pathetic. What do you have to do? She asked, eyebrows furrowing slightly with worry. Rather than answer, Naruto shrugged his shoulders. He was tired of talking to her. It wasn't that he was upset with her, on the contrary. He was embarrassed. It was obvious that she was pitying him. She handled him as if he were a china doll, as if he would break if she did or said the wrong thing. It was almost frustrating how nice she was being to him after everything that had happened. After everything he didn't deserve her smile. Standing up, he handed her the untouched bento and began to walk down the hill. I'm gonna go try to get ahead on some work. Ino grit her teeth. At first, she tried to be understanding. She could see why he'd feel a little awkward around her, and as such, she'd been extra careful not to bring up anything even remotely related to what had happened. However, things were getting a little out of hand. She turned around with an exasperated sigh, uneaten food dangling from her fingertips. Stop being this way, Naruto. So we made out a bit, big deal. I still consider us friends. She yelled at his back. The young man paused for a few seconds as if mulling her words over, but just as suddenly as he'd stopped, he continued to walk again. She threw his lunch at the back of his head, frowning when it hit the ground well before it even got close to him. Dash 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 dash. The hot water from the old shower head streamed down onto her hair, causing her long, wet bangs to fall into her eyes. Naruto was out on his mission, so she could take as long as she wanted to without having to worry about saving him any hot water. This was a rare chance for her, and she fully intended to make the most of it. She stepped out of the shower and dried herself off, taking the chance to admire her body in the mirror. She frowned at a few of the scars she'd gotten from some of her more intense battles, and she reached for the scar cream she'd bought to help them fade faster. She shuddered to think how bad her scars would be if she didn't use the stuff. After throwing on a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, she quickly clipped her toenails and applied some lotion. She kept the towel on her head and walked out into the living room. She plopped down on the couch with a loud grunt, glad to finally be resting after a hard week at the interrogation department. She had takeout that she'd picked up on the way home, a comfortable pair of sweats, and a good book, not a bad way to spend a Friday night. Ino propped her feet up on the arm of the chair in an attempt to get more comfortable. Since she had the place to herself, she could pretty much do whatever the hell she wanted, whenever the hell she wanted, and however the hell she wanted to. It was kind of like having her own apartment. She opened the warm carton of noodles and began to eat as she read, being careful not to choke as she did so. It wouldn't be the first time. Hell, it wouldn't even be the second or third. Sometimes she got so caught up in the story that she'd forget to chew, and well, let's just say that spewing rice through your nose wasn't the most comfortable feeling in the world. The book she was reading was sort of an adventure romance novel with a dash of comedy. It was basically a more mature version of the popular children's book, The Princess and the Fox, with all of the main characters being real people instead of animals or magical beings. The original story had been about a princess who wanted to visit her old friend the wizard. To get to the wizard's house, however, she had to brave one of the most dangerous parts of the forest where Orochi-san, the evil, giant snake lived. When Orochi-san managed to capture the princess using hypnosis, her friend the golden fox saved her and they all lived happily ever. In the book she was reading, the princess was a regular teenager, the fox was her strong, wrong side of the tracks friend, and the giant snake was the neighborhood gang boss who was trying to capture the princess and turn her into his willing slave. The old wizard was the girl's grandfather, a police chief with a penchant for justice, and rather than using hypnosis, the gang boss used some kind of mind-altering drug. By itself, the book wasn't that amazing. However, being able to draw lines between this story and the one that had been read to her as a child was what made it interesting. Just before she could take another bite of her food, the sound of a key being inserted into the lock grabbed her attention. She closed and tossed the book onto the short coffee table in front of her, more than a little surprised that Naruto was back so early. Not that she was complaining. They really needed to talk about what was going on between them so that they could go back to being good roommates. That was fast, she said, standing up and stretching as the door opened. I didn't think you'd be back for. Before she could finish her sentence, a shocked gasp reached her ears. A gasp that definitely didn't belong to Naruto. Ino. The blonde's eyes popped open, and she quickly wheeled around to see an equally wide-eyed Sakura staring back at her. Sakura, why are you in Naruto's apartment? As soon as she asked, understanding dawned on her. This is where you're staying. Moving faster than she ever had before, Ino hopped over the couch and grabbed Sakura's shoulders, staring pleadingly into the girl's eyes. You can't tell anyone. The medic nin pushed her friend's hands away, shooting her a disapproving frown. Ino, you're staying with a guy, and Naruto of all people. What the hell is wrong with you? It's not a big deal. It's Naruto, Sakura. He's not the type of guy who would steal my underwear or feel me up while I'm sleeping. She felt a little bad about pretty much saying that he wasn't a real man, but it was the only way she knew how to convince Sakura. The Hokage's apprentice paused in thought, apparently realizing that Ino was right. Well, that's true, but then what's the problem? The blonde pushed, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. The problem, Ino, is that you're living with a guy while your poor mother is at home freaking out. Ino lowered her eyes, feeling a little guilty. Well, what do you want me to do about it? It's not like I can go home. My mom wouldn't let me leave again if I went back, and I might accidentally run into my dad, she murmured. Sakura let loose another sigh before walking over to the couch and sitting down. This was almost too much to handle, and oddly enough, she felt herself becoming angry. I can't believe you've been here all this time. I thought we were best friends. How could you hide something like this from me? You won't tell, right? Ino asked, ignoring her questions. The pink-haired kunoichi was quiet for a few seconds, appearing to mull the request over in her mind. Finally, she rolled her eyes and leaned back into the worn cushions of Naruto's old couch. No, Ino, I won't tell anyone. The blonde crossed her arms tighter over her chest, slightly unconvinced. Promise me. I promise. Relieved, Ino plopped down on the chair next to her longtime friend, folding one leg under the other. Now that she was certain their secret was safe, there was something else that was bugging her. How did you get a key, anyway? Naruto gave it to me. Kakashi has one too, but he likes coming in through the window since it annoys him, Sakura explained, grabbing Ino's half-eaten container of noodles. She picked up the chopsticks and swallowed a mouthful, allowing a small, to escape past her lips. Ino's breath caught in her throat, surprised by this new information. Kakashi came by, too. Kakashi. How often does he show up? I dunno, he checks in whenever he feels like it. He probably already knows you're here. Noticing the horrified look on Ino's face, Sakura rolled her eyes. Don't worry, I doubt he's told anyone else. He probably finds it too amusing. Good. The last thing I need is for my dad to find me here. Putting the chopsticks down, the pink-haired kunoichi leveled her gaze. Look, Ino, I know this sounds horrible, but you really can't stay here. Ino's face instantly dropped into a scowl, and she bit the inside of her lip. Hard. What the? Where the hell did she get off telling her what she could and couldn't do? This was Naruto's apartment, and she had no say whatsoever in who could or couldn't live in it. You're right, it does sound horrible. Just hear me out, okay? Satisfied that Ino was looking at her, albeit with unhidden hostility, she continued. I know you find Naruto to be a nice guy, but he's still a guy. And, let's face it, Ino. You're a tease. Ino winced inwardly. As much as she wanted to, she really couldn't deny it. Dozens of guys and girls alike had told her the exact same thing, and just because it was unintentional didn't make it any less true. And, she asked, already knowing what was coming next. I'm just saying that it's only a matter of time before he tries to, you know. What? Tries to what? Sakura. I don't know, like, try something. What makes you think Naruto would do something like that? Never mind the fact that he'd already done it. Of course, it didn't really count since he had been emotionally distraught, but even if he hadn't been, Sakura was right. It definitely would have happened eventually. Because he kissed me. Ino's anger died, instantly being replaced by shock. He what? Well, yesterday, I ran into him after my shift at the hospital and he just kissed me out of nowhere. She looked up at the blonde and tilted her head, noticing the surprised expression on her friend's face. Ino. It suddenly all made sense. The need in his eyes, his desperation, it wasn't about her. It was never about her. Oh, do you see what I mean? About Naruto. He's just another guy. He's a nice guy, but still a guy. Okay. What did you do? When he kissed you? She asked, voice low and muffled. I slapped him. I didn't really mean to, but it just kind of happened before I could think about it. Really? I don't know what he was thinking. I have a boyfriend now, and it's not like a kiss would change my mind. Ino stiffened. Sakura's tone had started off gentle and apologetic, but the more she spoke, the more condescending she seemed to become. As if what she'd said wasn't bad enough, the girl continued to speak. Besides, it's Naruto. You know, he hasn't changed at all since we left the academy. He's like a big kid, and dating him would just be weird. Ino grit her teeth. The nonchalant way she disregarded Naruto's feelings, the feelings he'd carried for Sakura for as long as she could remember, pissed her off. Shut up, Sakura. Sakura blinked. She quickly ran her previous sentence through her mind, and finding nothing particularly insulting or mean in her statement, opened her mouth and uttered a single word. Huh. Get out. You don't know anything about Naruto yet you act like you're his best friend and spout all of this bullshit about how he hasn't changed. Naruto has grown up, you just haven't tried to notice. Instantly, the medic nin's eyes widened in understanding. You like him. Get out of my apartment. Ino. Sakura. If you're not gone in 5 seconds, you're leaving through that window, she snapped. Sakura stood to her feet, anger rolling off of her in waves. I don't know who the hell you think you are, Ino, but don't forget which one of us was trained by one of the legendary Sannin. Don't forget which one of us took on and beat a member of the Akatsuki, and you'd sure as hell had better not forget which one of us is Naruto's best friend. With that, the kunoichi turned on her heel and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ino clenched and unclenched her fingers, struggling with all her might to keep from following Sakura and kicking her. Naruto had kissed Sakura, probably right before he'd kissed her. At first she hadn't been that upset about his clumsy assault since she was sort of an unintentional tease, but now, well, she was no one's sloppy seconds. She couldn't wait until that rat bastard got home. Noticing how peaceful the atmosphere was as he and Naruto jumped through the trees, Shikamaru couldn't help but feel a little worried. Since the blonde was never quiet nor particularly introspective, there had to be something horribly wrong with him. Troublesome. Hey, Naruto, you okay? He asked, plopping down beside the blonde after he'd called for a rest. One leg was curled beneath him while the other swung gently beneath the tree branch. Yeah, Naruto mumbled, staring off into the distance. Shikamaru nodded silently to himself. There was definitely something wrong. If there's something bothering you, you can tell me. You know it'd be too troublesome for me to tell anyone else. It took a good minute, but Naruto eventually relented. Does Sai seem any different to you? No. He's pretty much the same as when I first met him. Why? So he's still the same emotionless bastard that he's always been. The strategist blinked, a little surprised by the bitterness in his voice. It wasn't like Naruto to badmouth a friend, even if it was Sai. Well, yeah, if you want to put it that way. What's this about? A sudden thought occurred to him. Is it about him and Sakura going out? A flash of anger passed across his face. I just don't get it. Why him? Women are troublesome, Shikamaru shrugged, unable to offer any advice. Frankly, he was just as surprised as everyone else was about the situation. Yeah, but Sai, well, if Sakura's anything like Ino, she'll dump him soon. Don't worry about it, I guess. A brief silence passed between them, lulling Shikamaru into believing that their conversation was over. No such luck. Hey, you're Ino's friend, right? The black-haired teen's eyes widened slightly. Listen, Naruto, I'm going to be honest with you, Ino's much more trouble than she's worth. What do you mean? She's my friend, but she's not really known for settling. She's pretty shallow when it comes to guys, and you don't exactly have the funds to keep her happy. Granted, if you manage to catch her attention, she's probably a great girl to have in your corner, but you'd have to catch her attention. Naruto nodded, taking in his words. If I wanted to catch her attention, which I don't, how would I do it? You'd have to be, not you. Like I said, Ino's picky. She plays a lot of games, so if you can keep her interested and on her toes, you might have a chance. Just know that you only get one real shot at her before she strikes you off of her list. He had to admit that his friend's analysis of her seemed spot on, but it still bugged him to hear Shikamaru say that about her. She doesn't seem that way to me. Shikamaru shrugged, already over the conversation. Okay, but don't chase Ino just because you can't have Sakura. You'll just end up making a huge mistake. Standing to his feet, he stretched and nodded towards their left. We should get moving. This mission's time sensitive after all. Mimicking his actions, Naruto put his fingers together into a familiar cross sign. He made 4 cage bunshin, hanged them into squirrels, and sent them ahead to scout while he and Shikamaru headed towards aim at a slightly slower pace. While they were scouting, The squirrels were also planting his seal everywhere just in case. It was supposed to be an easy mission, but he'd learned the hard way that missions were never as simple as they initially seemed. One of the clones found something, Naruto said, keeping his voice low. Shikamaru was instantly on guard. Where? West. There's a team from AIM. He also spotted the Yamanaka from before. Shit. He mumbled, eyebrows furrowing. We'll have to be careful. They made a beeline for the team, practically doubling their speed. Naruto had already sent his clones in and had instructed one of them to allow themselves to be killed. He was instantly flooded with an overview of what was happening, and it looked like by the time they'd arrive, the battle would be largely over. He was right. They landed in the clearing to see one remaining clone and the Yamanaka squaring off, both in battle stances at least until the clone suddenly exploded into a puff of smoke. The Yamanaka raised his eyes to Naruto's and grinned. Ah, there he is. The real Uzumaki Naruto, hero of the shinobi world and wanted by girls all across the nations. It's an honor being in your presence again, he shouted, theatrically stretching his arms towards the sky. When Naruto didn't answer, he continued. I didn't know that much about you before, but after our first meeting, I did my research. You are one amazing guy. I realized that I couldn't beat you. Unless. He ducked under the kunai that Shikamaru threw and smirked. Unless. I attacked your only vulnerable point. With Naruto watching, he raised his finger and tapped it against his own head. Telling me what you're going to do before you do it. You're falling into the old evil genius cliché, Naruto said, not taking his eyes off of the man for a second. He was up to something, but he didn't know what. Oh, no, you misunderstand. I've already done it. Naruto's eyes narrowed. What did he mean? He hadn't even moved. That thing I just did. Tapping my forehead while you looked into my eyes. The blonde's eyes widened. Correct. I just completed the jutsu. Now, I just have to activate it. As the man began to make hand signs, Naruto moved to stop him. Drawing on both kyubis and what small amount of natural chakra he could absorb in such a small time frame, he virtually teleported until he was standing directly in front of the Yamanaka. As if in slow motion, the man's grin widened. Too late. The next thing Naruto heard was that same loud ringing in his ears, and the last thing he saw was his fist caving in the man's face. Dash dash. The sound of the key turning in the lock catching her attention, Ino stalked towards the front door with murder in her eyes, fists balled and ready. She couldn't wait to cave his face in with her knuckles. Naruto, you. Before she could finish her sentence, Naruto grabbed her around the waist and pressed his lips against hers, instantly silencing her words. For a few seconds she simply allowed him to kiss her, too surprised to even move. Finally able to get a grip on herself, she roughly pushed him away, glaring daggers at him. What the hell are you doing? She yelled, breathing heavily as she struggled to regain her breath. Seeming to ignore her, Naruto began to attack her neck, kissing her all the way from her collarbone to her jaw. One of his hands rested on her lower back, and the other held firm onto the back of her head to keep it in place. Ino wanted nothing more than to scream at him for making a fool of her, but her mind refused to string together a coherent sentence. Every time she'd open her mouth to stop him, a short gasp or moan slipped out before she even had a chance to tell him to stop. Screw it. She could yell at him later. Reaching around behind him, she shoved the door closed to avoid any nosy neighbors, or worse, someone she actually knew, seeing them. Immediately after, she pushed him up against the smooth slab of wood and began to kiss him back, removing his lips from her neck. She felt his hands lower until they reached her sweatpant-clad bottom, and apparently feeling dangerous, he gripped both cheeks and gave them a nice, strong squeeze. She couldn't help it, she squealed. The move had caught her largely off guard, and though she was loath to admit, it had actually felt pretty good. She couldn't let him know that, though. Don't get ahead of yourself, she mumbled, grabbing his hands and pulling them back up to her waist. Unfortunately, her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Take your shirt off, he commanded, voice leaving no room for argument. Before she could even register his words, Naruto had somehow managed to slip most of her shirt over her head. By the time she realized that she was topless, he was already staring at her bare chest. She quickly crossed her arms in front of her, shielding herself from his wandering eyes. "You're beautiful, Ino." Her breath hitched in her throat. While she was busy reeling from how fast things were going, Naruto had somehow worked his way behind her. His hand slid smoothly down her toned stomach, ever so slowly beginning to creep into her pants. And it was at that moment that she woke up. Gasping for breath, Ino rolled over and turned on the lamp sitting next to her futon, instantly bathing the room in light. She took a few moments to get oriented, eyes wide and unfocused as she stared blankly at the brightly glowing light. What the hell was that? Did she really just have a wet dream about Naruto? She felt a slight tingling in her crotch. Yep, she definitely had a wet dream. Though, in retrospect, she really should have known. Like Sakura had said earlier, Naruto was a good guy. He didn't have the balls to grab her or command her to strip, and he certainly didn't know that the weakest spot on her body was her collarbone. No, this couldn't happen. There was just no way that she liked Naruto. No way in hell. It had only been one stupid kiss, and to be honest, he hadn't even been that great at it. It was probably because of that stupid romance novel she'd borrowed from the library a week or so ago, and since Naruto was the closest male to her, her brain had naturally latched onto him as the ideal male subject for her dream. Besides, there were tons of other guys to choose from. Sure, Naruto was the strongest, but there were other guys who were richer and better looking. She'd just be settling if she decided to date Naruto. Hands shaking, she ripped a piece of paper out of her notebook and wrote Naruto's name at the top of the paper. Underneath that, she wrote good and bad in large, bold letters, followed by a thick vertical line separating the two words. Bad. What's bad about Naruto? She muttered to herself, tapping the marker against the table. After a few seconds of thought, she began to write. He's immature. Not that smart. He's not cool. Can be annoying and hyper. Clueless sometimes. Has some emotional baggage. No fashion sense. In love with Sakura. Which was true. Even when he wasn't wearing his orange jumpsuits, he walked around in oversized t-shirts, shorts, and sandals most of the time. Good things. Surprisingly, it was much easier to think of these. He's loyal, and always tries to help. Really fun to be around. Likes to try new things. Ambitious. Strong. Cute. Really hot body. Thoughtful. Always full of surprises. And, he challenged her. Sure, they often made fun of each other and exchanged the occasional punch in the shoulder, but that was what made their friendship exciting. The only males who ever dared to stand up to her were Shikamaru, her father, and occasionally Choji whenever she mentioned something about his weight. Most did their best to please or placate her, and while she certainly didn't mind being doted on, it didn't take long for her to get bored with those kinds of guys. Not to say that she liked jerks. She didn't have time for men who believed women were second-rate human beings. All she wanted was a tiny bit of friction every now and then, a little banter to keep her grounded when her admittedly large ego started to get out of control. She wanted someone who found just living to be boring, and was always looking for something new or interesting to do. She looked over the list one more time before dropping her face into her hands, unable to believe what she was about to say next. I like Uzumaki Naruto.